Have you ever noticed that the loudest person in a meeting is often the one who knows the least? A person who's skimmed a single article suddenly speaks with total, unshakable authority. Meanwhile, the actual expert in the room is usually the quietest. When you ask them a direct question, their answer sounds hesitant. They use words like probably, mostly, or it depends. It creates a strange dynamic where confidence seems to move in the exact opposite direction of actual competence. And there is a specific, measurable reason why our brains do this. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in Pittsburgh and robbed them in broad daylight. He wore no mask and made no attempt to hide his face from the cameras. Instead, he had rubbed lemon juice all over his face. He knew that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink, and somehow his brain made the leap that this meant it would also render his face invisible to security cameras. Police easily arrested him hours later after airing the surveillance footage on the evening news. When they showed him the tapes, Wheeler stared at the screen in genuine, profound shock, mumbling, "But I wore the juice." Wheeler had even gone so far as to test his theory at home by taking a Polaroid selfie. The photo came out blank, likely because he pointed the camera at the ceiling by mistake, but it left him absolutely 100% certain his plan was flawless. His brain systematically hid his own severe ignorance from him. This specific cognitive failure, where extreme incompetence prevents a person from recognizing their own mistakes, inspired one of the most famous psychological studies of the late 20th century. 4 years later, Cornell University psychologists David Dunning and Dunning-Kruger set out to measure exactly how well people can assess their own abilities. They gave students a series of tests measuring skills in logic, grammar, and recognizing humor. Then, before showing them their actual scores, they asked the students to estimate how well they had performed compared to everyone else. This chart shows their findings. The people who scored lowest on the tests, the bottom 12th percentile, radically overestimated their performance. They believed they were above average, placing themselves in the 62nd percentile. Notice how the perceived ability line stays falsely elevated. Dunning and Kruger realized the exact skills required to write a grammatically correct sentence are the very same skills needed to recognize a grammatical mistake. If you lack the skill to do the task, you also suffer a metacognitive deficit, meaning you lack the capacity to evaluate your own performance. When you acquire just a tiny fraction of knowledge about a new subject, your brain generates a massive spike in confidence. You know enough to feel empowered, but not nearly enough to see the deep complexities of the field. Incompetence is a dual burden. You make fatal mistakes, and you are neurologically robbed of the ability to recognize them. But look at the far right of the chart. The students who actually performed the best, the true experts in the room, also misjudged their abilities, except they consistently underestimated themselves. This happens because of the false consensus effect. Highly competent people find a task easy, so they mistakenly assume it must be equally easy for everyone else. They view their own exceptional performance as perfectly average. Furthermore, as you acquire deep knowledge, you become painfully aware of the exceptions, the unknowns, and the sheer volume of nuance you still do not understand. True expertise naturally produces hesitation. We are left with a dangerous cultural dynamic where the people who know the least feel completely certain, while the smartest people constantly doubt themselves. If you take this psychological data out of the 1990s laboratory and apply it to our modern digital landscape, you see how these signals are powerfully amplified. Social media algorithms are engineered to reward absolute certainty. They push the loudest, most overconfident voices to the top of our feeds because bold claims drive engagement, while nuanced, caveated explanations are punished by the algorithm and ignored. We consume a 5-minute explainer video or read a single thread, and we mistake that brief feeling of familiarity for actual mastery of a complex subject. We have accidentally built an information infrastructure that elevates blind certainty over factual accuracy, actively scaling the exact cognitive failure Dunning and Kruger warned us about. It is incredibly easy to hear all of this and assume it only applies to other, less informed people. But high intelligence and past success do not make you immune. In fact, prolonged success often leads to earned dogmatism. You become so accustomed to being right that you stop evaluating your own blind spots. There is no internal signal to warn you. From inside your own mind, the feeling of being completely wrong is indistinguishable from the feeling of being completely right. True intellectual competence requires aggressive humility. It demands a constant suspicion of your own certainty and a willingness to accept how much you are still missing.